The Veiled Age, Episode 7, The Lead of Calalus. When the 32 lead artifacts emerged from the desert outside Tuscon, they carried a weight that had nothing to do with metal. Their Latin inscriptions were uneven but intelligible, naming Israelis Romanos Toltezus and speaking of Calalus, the land of the west, ruled by Rex Theodorus and later by Jacob, king of the people. Some tablets recount battles: Belo contra Chichimeco, war against the Chichimec tribes, and others mention years like Anno Domini 885 AD. Even rough, they follow patterns consistent with frontier Latin: simple grammar, compressed syntax, and military phrases. Hebrew characters appear beside them, letters resembling Resh, Yod, Aleph, and Tav, forming fragments interpreted as rest, tribe, God, and remnant, suggesting a community with Jewish identity layered onto Roman structure. One tablet's inscription, roughly translated, reads, "We, the exiles, children of Israel and Rome, wandered to Calulus beyond the Western Sea." That line alone is enough to fracture the accepted timeline. And yet, the metal itself, lead poured into primitive molds, cooling striations matched to early casting techniques, multi-stage engravings, consistent with ancient tools, supports the idea that these were not modern fakes. Scott Wolter's analysis noted natural corrosion layers, microcrystal structures, and weathering impossible to reproduce convincingly without centuries of exposure. Even if half the inscriptions are genuine records, they reveal a community traveling between continents long before Columbus, before Norse sagas surfaced, before Old World and New World were officially allowed to touch. Which may explain why every official voice rushed to silence them. History has its limits, and these tablets fall outside the permitted perimeter. The narrative across the artifacts forms a story not of conquest but of survival. They speak of a mixed Romano-Judean people driven west after conflicts in the Old World, a group that possibly followed ocean currents used since Phoenician times, arriving in a land they called Salalus or Calalus, a word with echoes of Calais, Caledonia, and Kal-El, the Hebrew root for fortress of God. The artifacts describe kingship lines, struggles for succession, treaties with local tribes, and repeated wars that pushed them into decline. Phrases like regnum fractum, the kingdom broken, and populus dispersus, people scattered, suggest a familiar Jewish theme of exile replaced across an unknown continent. The symbols carved into the metal deepen this story. The cross of Lorraine, a double bar cross, linked to the protection, dual authority, and pre-Templar gnosis, appears beside Hebrew letters, forming a hybrid identity scholars refuse to classify. The so-called dinosaur, mocked by critics, resembles instead a stylized dragon standard used by late Roman frontier units, a banner meant to roar in the wind as psychological warfare. The artifacts' mixture of languages and images forms a cultural fingerprint: Roman military tradition, Jewish spirituality, and Old World symbology fused in the crucible of displacement. This is not something that happens in a workshop hoax. This is something that happens when people carry their past across an ocean and carve their memory into any substance that withstands time. And lead, with its softness, its durability, its alchemical association with secrecy, was the perfect archive for those who suspected their story might someday need to be rediscovered rather than believed. Why would such a record be denied so aggressively? Because the implications ripple outward with destructive precision. If these inscriptions are genuine, they prove transoceanic contacts centuries before the sanctioned starting line of world history. They imply that navigation lore, Jewish diasporic threads, Roman survival strategies, and hybrid frontier cultures reached the Americas long before the church, the crown, or academic institutions were ready to accept such crossings. They hint that the Templars' supposed knowledge of Western lands was not rumor, but inheritance, that the double-bar cross carved into the tablets was a marker of identity that predates their order, but was later adopted by it. That the feminine current associated with the Lorraine cross represents continuity, lineage, and protection of sacred memory. And above all, they reveal that history is not closed. It breathes through symbols that refuse to stay buried. The Tuscan artifacts wound mainstream narratives because they demand acknowledgement that the world was connected long before those in power claimed to map it. Whether created by an exiled community, a forgotten order, or a wandering remnant that crossed seas in defiance of empires, the tablet makes one truth unavoidable. The past is far wider, older, and more interconnected than the guardians of official history are prepared to admit.